Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're cracking open the psychological blueprint of Shakespeare's Julius Caesar. We are going to see exactly how complex characterization acts as this invisible engine driving the ultimate tragedy. If you've ever wondered how words on a page translate into such explosive, inevitable human drama, well, you are in the right place. We're going to map out the minds of some of literature's absolute most famous figures. Here's a quick look at our roadmap for today. 1. Character drives the plot. 2. Caesar, the flawed god. 3. Brutus, the blind idealist. 4. Cassius, the shrewd schemer. 5. Antony, the ruthless orator. And finally 6. A collision of characters.
All right, Section 1, Character drives the plot. How Shakespeare builds a psychological profile. When we talk about Shakespearean tragedy, there's a foundational rule we absolutely need to get right off the bat. The plot doesn't just happen to people. Things happen strictly because characters act in a certain, predictable way based on their nature. So in essence, the plot is literally just character in motion.
Notice just how surgical this analysis gets. We can analyze these ancient figures using 4 precise methods, and these are going to act as our psychological dossier for this entire explainer. We look at what they say, or crucially, what they fail to say. We look at their actions, or their failure to act. We listen to the gossip, what other characters say about them. And finally, we look at how Shakespeare uses foils, deliberately contrasting one character against another to highlight their extremes. Keep these 4 pillars in mind as we introduce our main players. Moving to Section 2, Caesar, the flawed god, public greatness versus private weakness. Let's dive right into our very first profile, Julius Caesar. This is a man whose colossal public image is carefully constructed to mask some incredibly deep physical and psychological vulnerabilities.
Publicly, the guy is celebrated as the ultimate Roman general and senator. He's entirely aware of his own greatness, and honestly, his followers and enemies alike acknowledge it. He's viewed as a man who bestrides the majestic world like a colossus. His influence is so immense that it dominates the entire Roman world, even dictating the whole atmosphere of the play long after he's assassinated.
But contrast that public arrogance with the stark, private reality. Behind closed doors, he suffers from the falling sickness, and he's deaf in one ear, which is a pretty serious handicap for a leader of men. He actually lacks physical endurance, highlighted by this crazy anecdote in the text about a swimming match in the Tiber River that he nearly lost. On top of that, he is highly superstitious. He panics over his wife's evil dreams and orders sacrifices, even while he's desperately trying to hide that fear under a heavy, macho exterior.
This reveals a remarkably inconsistent leader. Caesar puts up this courageous front, repeatedly referring to himself in the third person to project invulnerability, but he's actually deeply afraid of the senators. He grandly rejects petitions from his subjects out of unchecked pride, literally calling them curs just to maintain an image of absolute authority. It's a really bad look for a man pretending to be a god.
Section 3. Brutus, the blind idealist, the noble philosopher. Next up, we're examining the man who leads the charge to tear that god down, Marcus Brutus. He's universally known as an honorable man, but his greatest virtues ultimately become his fatal, tragic flaws.
To really get Brutus, you have to understand this one concept. He is fundamentally a stoic philosopher. He's devoted entirely to the welfare of his country, no matter the personal cost. Yet, Shakespeare makes sure to humanize him. He isn't just a robot. He shows a deeply affectionate nature. He treats his servant boy Lucius with immense kindness, and he shares his innermost anxious thoughts with his wife Portia. That's a relationship that is vastly more intimate than Caesar's relationship with his own wife.
But here's the catch, and it's a big one. Brutus is noble, for sure, but his patriotic idealism actually causes what the source material calls diseased reasoning. Think about it. He convinces himself to murder Caesar, his actual friend, not for what Caesar has already done, but because sovereignty might change his nature in the future. It's an erroneous, entirely biased argument. He's an incorrigible idealist, lacking any real worldly wisdom, proving over and over that a philosopher is, well, completely unfit to be a practical statesman.
Section 4. Cassius, the shrewd schemer, the practical intriguer. Which brings us to his perfect foil. If Brutus is the head-in-the-clouds idealist, Caius Cassius is the grounded, unscrupulously practical schemer.
Caesar himself describes this guy as lean, gaunt, and hungry, and he hits the nail on the head. Cassius spends his time observing, looking right through the polite fictions of Roman society. Unlike Brutus, Cassius is incredibly worldly wise in his motivations, not noble at all. He organizes the conspiracy driven by personal grudges and sheer jealousy of Caesar's growing popularity and power, rather than any true high-minded patriotism.
This dynamic is a masterclass in how Shakespeare uses character foils. Cassius is a shrewd intriguer who knows human nature perfectly. He uses extortion, bribery, and oath-binding to seduce the noble Brutus into joining the conspiracy. And tragically, Cassius is proven practically right every single time Brutus overrules him on a strategic decision. Cassius is a realist playing a very dirty game, while Brutus is trying to play by moral rules that just don't apply anymore.
So, once the assassination is complete, we're left with a massive power vacuum. With Caesar dead and the idealists and schemers suddenly thrust into control, who's left to step into the void and manipulate the chaos?
Section 5. Antony, the ruthless orator, the master manipulator. This brings us to a brilliant turning point and a character who hides his lethal competence right in plain sight, Mark Antony. Brutus fatally misjudged him, basically dismissing Antony as this frivolous young merrymaker, just a mere limb of Caesar who'd be completely harmless once the head was cut off. But Antony? Actually a deeply shrewd and entirely unprincipled planner.
You see this most clearly at Caesar's funeral. In stark contrast to Brutus's dry, logical explanation to the citizens, Antony delivers an absolute masterpiece of an oration. He masks his deep hostility beneath half-revealed facts and genuine emotion. He reads the mind of the mob perfectly, appealing directly to their feelings and playing them like a musician on an instrument. By the end of his speech, he's successfully whipped the crowd into an insatiable, furious mutiny, forcing Brutus and Cassius to flee Rome like madmen. He is utterly ruthless, later proving he's perfectly willing to use and discard his own allies just to consolidate his power.
Section 6. A collision of characters. The domino effect. Now let's step back and look at how these deeply flawed, unmasked individuals actually collide to create the tragedy. It's not just a sequence of random events, it's an interlocking psychological mechanism. It's a perfect, deadly domino effect, where the specific weaknesses of one archetype trigger the destructive traits of the next. Caesar's inconsistent arrogance breeds deep resentment. That resentment fuels Cassius's personal jealousy, sparking the conspiracy. Cassius then leverages Brutus's blind idealism to give the bloody plot a veneer of moral legitimacy. And finally, Antony's ruthless manipulation takes advantage of Brutus's strategic naivety to burn the whole thing down. Like we said earlier, plot is just character in motion.
And the wild thing is, through it all, despite the shifting allegiances and the bloody civil war, Caesar's spirit remains the dominant gravitational force over the entire Roman world. His influence dictates the end of the play just as much as his physical presence dictated the beginning, a grim truth that Brutus himself actually admits with his dying breath.
Which leaves us to consider the real lasting power of this psychological blueprint. These aren't just old names and togas. How often do we still see these exact same 400-year-old archetypes, the flawed god projecting false strength, the blind idealist making catastrophic practical errors, the shrewd schemer working the backrooms, and the ruthless orator whipping up the mob, driving the plots of our modern world today? Keep your eyes open. You might realize Shakespeare's tragedy is still unfolding all around us. Thanks for joining me on The Explainer.